Hey, what's up everybody? My name is Evan Schneider and welcome back to another video. Today in this video, we're going to be creating color grades for two different types of genres of projects. The first genre is going to be a film grade and the second genre is going to be a commercial grade. Now, the key thing we want to think about is the purpose of each project. Now, the film grade is primarily trying to tell a story. We're trying to enhance and portray emotion of the characters. And we're trying to enhance the set design and the lighting and the wardrobe to tell that story better. Now, in a commercial world, we're trying to sell something. So that means that we're trying to catch the viewer's attention, whatever device or TV they're watching on. We're trying to make something that pops. We're trying to highlight the product or the idea, and we're trying to be very, very clear about what it is we're selling and make it look as attractive as possible to the viewer. So those are kind of going to be my guiding principles for every decision I make in the color grading process of this video. I think you'll find this process really interesting, and let's get into it. All right, so we're here in DaVinci Resolve. And a side note, I downloaded these 3 clips from ArtGrid, and ArtGrid is not a sponsor of this channel, but I just wanted to say, if you're a colorist, you can pay for the top tier of ArtGrid and you can actually download the raw or log versions of these clips. These were shot on the Red Raven, and so they were shot in Red Log 3G10 and Red Wide Gamut RGB. Now, if you aren't familiar with color management and log formats and all that stuff, you don't necessarily need to worry about that. This is going to be part of our look creating process, but I actually have other videos on my channel talking about how to convert log footage and work with log footage. But for this video, since we're focusing on look creation and working on creating styles for different genres, we're going to skip over that pretty quick. I'll show you my settings real quick, just so you know where I'm coming from and my workflow. My color management is set to DaVinci YRGB, timeline color space is Rec 709 2.4, and my output is the same. I'm working in a uncolor managed pipeline because I prefer to do it on the node level, and I think it's easier to demonstrate these concepts without using color management and kind of complicating it a little bit more. I'm also going to go to my camera raw and go to red and just show you that I'm decoding half res good so that I can get good playback. And then I'm also debayering it in IPP2, Red Wide Gamut RGB, and Log 3G10. And I'm using the camera metadata for all of the ISO, color, temperature, and tint as it was shot. First thing I'm going to do is just scroll through these 3 clips and see what we're working with. One thing I'm noticing is this window is blown out. You can see it in my waveform here. It's the same in this shot, but that doesn't necessarily bother me because there's nothing outside and we're kind of focusing on the subject anyways. The good thing is that this shot, our hero shot, the lamp is fully there and we're not having to deal with any overexposed areas. And that's great. All this footage is looking pretty nice. Anytime I'm working on a project and setting up a look, I'm thinking about how that look is going to be applied to the other shots. So I'm not just working on shots in isolation. I'm creating a pipeline and a workflow for myself to save myself time in the future and to make it easier for myself to make adjustments if the director or the client or anybody wants to make any changes. So first things first, I'm just going to apply my color space transform to this footage. And I'm going to go to Red Wide Gamut RGB and Red Log 3G10. And that's going to convert us to our output color space. I'm just going to use the timeline because I've set it up to Rec 709 Gamma 2.4. If you're working in a different gamma like Rec 709A on a Mac, you can just set that in your project settings and then output to the used timeline color space. That's all good to go. Now I'm going to use this shot as my hero shot. So we're going to use this shot and then go to the other ones and balance it and apply the grade to those, make it match. But this shot is kind of my hero shot because it has all of the different elements that are important to me in the grade. Now I know you're probably itching for me to just get into it and start making different adjustments, but I want to be intentional and thoughtful about what I'm doing here with these 2 different grades. So kind of my plan looking at this shot is we could kind of go 2 different ways with this footage. The first way is we can play into the shadows, and the second way is we can play into the highlights. And I think for the film grade, I'm going to play into the shadows because I feel like that kind of portrays the mood and emotion of this footage a little bit better. And it kind of has a mysterious, almost like sensual look. And I really want to play into the highlights on her face and the light from the lamp and kind of push a lot of this into the shadows a little bit. And then the second way we can do it for the commercial grade is kind of playing into the highlights and the skin tone and make it pop. And for that, I'm going to really try to bring up this side of her face. I'm going to let the lamp and the highlights kind of just be nice and bright. And our goal for that is to make a really eye-catching and a really nice looking image. So let's get started on the film grade. So first thing I'm going to do is label this node CST. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a node before by hitting Shift S, and we're going to call this primary. And this workflow is kind of a general workflow that I use for any video. Now, if your footage is in log and it's a different log format, you can just input that in your CST. If you're not working with log footage, then you can just skip the CST and you can just start off with a primary node. Okay, so on my primary node, I'm just going to play with my offset because I'm working underneath my color space transform. And you can see here, we have a lot of latitude to play with, and we have, you know, some different decisions we're going to make. So what I'm going to do is, I said I wanted to play into the shadows. I'm just going to bring it down and see kind of what it's feeling like. Now, I don't want to go down too far because this is my primary node. So this is just kind of getting me in the balance ballpark. The other thing I'm going to do is balance my footage with my vector scope. I'm going to put the mass, kind of the central mass of the footage into the middle here. And this is because I want to create some sort of color contrast. So I'm going to play into the cool shadows around here and the warm light and the warm skin tones to create a more dramatic feel. So let's put that mass in the middle, and we're kind of straddling all four quadrants on the vector scope. I'm going to go back to my waveform, maybe bring it up a tiny bit. And I think I might just warm it up a little bit because I want to keep the skin tones in a good spot. We can always adjust this later. Next, I'm going to go to my CST and create a new node after, and I'm going to call this curves. And this is where we're going to get kind of creative with the look development. So a really basic thing that I like to do to create kind of a split tone look with cool shadows and warm highlights is to use the curves. Now, what I'm going to do is create a point down here, and I'm just going to pull the red out of the shadows. And you can see that the shadows are pulling a little bit more cool. Then I'm going to create a point up here, and I want this point to be kind of around where the skin tones are lying, maybe a little bit above. You can decide where you want the crossover to be based on your footage. And I'm just going to bring the midtones in the red channel a little bit higher. And so now we're only really affecting the shadows. And we're going to kind of mess around with this a little bit, and you can get that to your liking. The next thing I'm going to do is I really want the blue lamp and kind of the highlights on her skin to push really warm. So I'm just going to bring the blue top point down, and you can see here that we're already getting a really nice kind of cinematic look with that. Next, I'm going to maybe push a tiny bit of blue into the shadows. You got to be really careful with that. And then next, we're going to go to our green channel, and this is where we can kind of play with the balance. So I like the footage pushing a little more green. I think it looks a little bit more filmic, and it kind of fits the vibe that we're going for. And so you can kind of play with this and see how it interacts with your footage. But even in that node, we've created a split tone look where we have cool shadows and warm highlights. And this is a really subtle version of kind of the teal orange look, but it is very effective on this footage, and it brings our eye kind of up her face and looking at her mouth, and then kind of draws the eye up, and it pushes all of this into the shadows. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to my hue versus hue curve. I'm going to create a new node just so that we can see the differences when I do these adjustments. I'm just going to call it hue versus. You can already see we have a teal and orange vibe already going on. I might push the blues around a little bit and see what feels good. Maybe push it up a tiny bit. And then I want my yellow tones to kind of sit in there a little bit better. This is a really subtle adjustment, but I'm kind of looking at her hair and the lamp, and maybe we push this up and then bring this down a little bit. Smooth it out. That's pretty good. Let's bring the saturation of the reds up a little bit just to increase the intensity of those. So this difference is subtle, but we're just bringing out this light a little bit and pushing her hair. Next, I'm going to create a new node, and this is kind of where I'm going to create a bit more of a tone curve. So I'm just going to call it tone. And we're going to go to our curves again. I'm going to link all of the channels and then click on editable splines. And this is where we're going to create a little bit more of a tone and a contrast to the footage. So I just want to create kind of a little toe down here, maybe bring the shadows up. And we want to pull up our waveform while we do this to see where we're sitting. So bring the shadows down, and then I'm going to create a really soft roll off. Kind of bring those tones up. And you can kind of play with this as you go and see what it feels like. We can also kind of push it to the extreme and see what it feels like if we push it more. Now we're really compressing those shadows down into the bottom. I'm going to see, so right now her skin tone is kind of, in the shadows, it's falling around 20%. And then in the highlights, you know, this is kind of her skin tone. You can see the little bubble on the waveform showing me where the picker is showing. And we're sitting at around 30 to 50% in most of her skin tone, which is a good ratio, a good level, because we want it to be sitting darker. That's looking pretty awesome. So in those three, this is kind of my look creation node structure. In those three nodes, we've created a really nice filmic look. And so we have our curves adjustment. I'll turn these off. We have our curves, and then we have our hue versus, and then we have our tone curve. And now we can kind of play with it a little bit and see where we want everything to fall. So I'm going to go back to my vector scope, and we can go to our primary, and we can actually kind of play around with the offset and see what it looks like being fed into our pipeline. So from here, we could even push a little bit cooler. We could even warm it up. And if I push it into this top quadrant right here, you can see what it would look like if it was super warm. And that's kind of like a dreamy look. If we wanted to, we could go to our tone and just kind of dial the saturation back. And now we have kind of a really nice, warm, monochromatic look that we could push down the entire pipeline. I'm going to set that back to 50, and I kind of prefer a little more color contrast. And let's maybe let it sit right around there. And we can also play with, you know, our offset like that, you know, dial it in. This feels really good to me. This is a really nice look that you could apply to the rest of the footage. I want to get a little bit more creative with this look. So I'm just going to create a couple more elements with some effects that kind of sell that filmic look a little bit more. So the first thing I'm going to do is create kind of a glow. And now we're kind of just finessing this look. So let's go to glow. One thing I really like to do with glow is set it to screen. And then we're going to bring down the shine threshold. And you can see that this is creating a super nice kind of almost a pro mist, you know, diffusion filter. Then we can play with our spread. And that's just kind of creating a really dreamy look. And it's kind of bringing that light and highlighting this eye. And it's also creating a nice glow around her fingertips. So if we play that back, it just has a really nice atmospheric vibe now. And it's really like when you watch this, you can really feel an emotion and a mood. And, you know, that's going to contribute to the story. The last thing that we can do is just create a grain node. And for this, we're going to use the film grain plugin in Resolve. This is built in. And I'm going to make this a little bit more dramatic because YouTube compression. Bring up the strength, bring up the size, maybe increase softness a little bit. Bring down the strength and then bring up the strength so you can see. Bring down the size a little bit. So now we have, playing back a little bit slower, but now we have a bit of a film grain over top of it. And that kind of just brings it all together. Now you can use whatever you want for the film grain. You can use this plugin. Sometimes I also like to mess with Film Convert. You can also use Video Village plugins. There's a lot of different film grain. You can download assets and apply them over your footage, but we're just going to use this time. After all these adjustments, let's run through our node tree one more time. So this is our Rec 709 conversion from log using our CST. Then we have a primary adjustment, pulling the footage down into the shadows a little bit. And then we've got our curves adjustment, creating that split tone look, teal and orange. Our hue versus, just to kind of refine the tones a little bit. We have our tone curve to add some nice contrast. We have a glow, and we have the grain. And there is our film look on our hero shot. So next thing we just have to do is apply this to the other clips. And the way that I like to do that is I like to hit option 1 on the keyboard, and that saves a memory. The other thing I like to do is just right click and grab a still, and I can see that in my still gallery now. And then I like to go to the other clips, and you can either hit Command 1, which will apply that grade to this clip, or you can hit the equal sign, which will apply the grade prior, or you can go to your gallery and you can right click and hit apply grade. And all of those different methods work. They all do the same thing. Now I can hit Command W and it'll turn on my wipe, which will show me the gallery still that I just grabbed, and I can switch back and forth between them. Now this is kind of where my shot balancing is going to happen, and I have a decision to make here if I want to see her face at all and how much I want to blow out the highlights. And this is definitely like a pretty cool look. You can barely see her face, but I kind of like it being a little bit more mysterious in the shadows. The next thing on my vector scope, I can see that this one is pushing a little bit warmer because it's in this quadrant, and this one is pushing a little bit cooler. So I'm just going to bring this one down and push those shadows into a little bit of a cooler zone. And flipping back and forth, you can kind of, you know, line up the masses of the two and make sure that they're matching. And that looks pretty good to me. This one maybe could sit a little bit warmer. That looks kind of nice. Then we're going to apply it to this shot and scroll through. And I think this one is a little bit bright, so we can bring that down. And we'll A/B it with the other one and maybe warm this up a little bit to line up better. And now we've applied it to the 3 clips. Now, obviously, our window light is getting pretty bright. We could do a little bit of work to bring that back in these shots. We can go to our glow layer and just bring down the bright region recovery to bring back some of that detail. But it doesn't bother me that much, and I kind of like how bright it gets. So for this example, it's not too bad. So that is our film look, and it's motivated by emotion. It's motivated by lighting and set design and color. And we've really created an emotion. We've kind of pushed into the mysterious, almost sensual tone of this footage. And we're trying to create a emotional response in the viewer to tell whatever story is being told here. All right, so now let's work on the commercial grade for this footage. Now we're going to be going a completely different direction for the commercial grade. We're going to be creating a look that pushes into the highlights, that highlights her skin tone and makes the subject pop against the background. And we're going to be using some techniques to make a really nice, clean, warm, inviting commercial look for this footage. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to reset all of these clips, and I'm going to copy our CST before I delete this. And I'm just going to paste the CST back on here so that we're in the same starting zone. And we're kind of going to use the same node structure as before. So I'm just going to create a primary node here. And we're just going to balance it maybe a little bit brighter so that we have a good starting point. And then I'm going to go to my vector scope, and I might just push it a little bit warmer into that quadrant because we want it to be a little less teal and orange look, but just nice and warm and inviting. Next, we're going to go and make a node after our CST. I'm going to create a new label and call it contrast. And in this node, I'm going to show you kind of a technique that I like to use that's really quick and a really easy way to kind of push the exposure around and create a nice look. And that's using the contrast and pivot tools. And so in this node, I'm just going to increase the contrast a little bit to a point that feels kind of nice. And you can see my shadows are getting pushed down. So now I'm going to decrease the pivot. And this is kind of adjusting the middle point of the contrast S-curve that it's creating. And what we can do here is really push it brighter. And as I bring down my pivot, more of the midtones are getting pushed up. And I should be looking at my waveform here as I do this adjustment. And you can see as I move my pivot, it's changing the center point of that S-curve. And as I increase my contrast, you can kind of see where the tones are being pivoted around. So if I move my pivot up and then increase my contrast, you can see that it's, pushing it from a different point. If I move it down, so you can kind of play with these two tools to make kind of a slightly different look. And for this one, I kind of want the shadows to, I'm going to turn on my eyedropper, and I want the shadows to be hitting, not as dark of a point as our film grade. And I want them to be sitting kind of, her whole face to be sitting between 30 and 50 on the waveform. So we have the shadows here, they're sitting around 30, and the highlights here are kind of going around 50. I might bring my pivot down a little bit just to make those work a bit. And we're really compressing our highlights up here. So that looks good to me so far. We can always adjust that later. I'm going to create a new node, and I'm just going to call this hue versus. And the reason I'm putting this after the contrast node here instead of in the film grade is because now I have a lot more tones to work with in my vector scope, and I'll have a better source to work with and some nice colors to kind of push around. So for this one, maybe I'm going to make a few points, and I have kind of my red tones, and I'm looking at her hair. And I think it would be nice if it pushed a little bit more towards magenta. And then I'm going to kind of dial in her skin tone to be, at a nice level. So I'll push those there. So that just kind of takes that greenish tone out of some of her hair and just pushes it to be a little bit more refined. And then for the blue tones, I might push those a little bit this way to be more like regular blue instead of greenish blue, to make it feel a little bit happier. Next thing I'm going to do is go to my saturation, create some new points, and I'm just going to bring up saturation of those red tones. And then go back to my hue, and we're just kind of playing with this and adjusting it to be at a nice, happy area. That's looking pretty good. The next thing I'm kind of wanting to do is kind of cool this light down, kind of make it feel a little bit cleaner. I'm just going to call it highlights. And for this one, I'm just going to use the gain control, and I'm just going to bring it down to the right to kind of cool it off. Maybe something like that. That's looking pretty good. And finally, I think it'd be nice if we just brought back the midtone detail a little bit, dialed it back. And you can see, like, if I zoom in here, we can just kind of soften it a little bit. And it just kind of takes the edge off of the digital footage. So maybe -30. And it just kind of dials back the sharpness and has almost like a dream, you know, 1/4 black pro mist kind of look. Let's label this node and we'll call it MD for midtone detail. Now I think I'm just going to go back to my primary and kind of push it around and see what feels best. And I kind of like it a little bit warmer. Maybe right there. That feels pretty good. I might go to my hue versus, and I'm just going to I'm going to go to my lume versus sat, and I'm just going to bring the highlight saturation down a little bit to clean up those highlights, you know, just create a little bit of a saturation curve on the end of it. And that's just really cleaning up the highlights, and it's pushing the green and making it a little bit more magenta, a little bit more accurate to her skin tone. And that's looking pretty nice. So the only thing that we have left to do is to apply the commercial grade to the rest of the clips. And what I'm going to do is just hit option 2. And I'm going to save a still of this. And then I'm going to go to my middle shot, hit command 2. And for this one, I'm kind of curious to see what it looks like if I push this brighter and just really show her face. Now, I think I'm going to have to do a little bit of work to dial back the shadows to make them a little bit more neutral. And we can put the two side by side to kind of see, what's happening here. So now I can move around the first one, and you can see on my vector scope, this is a really easy way to match. I can move this around and just line it up so that the two are kind of overlaying each other, and then just dial it in, and I'm looking at the viewer now. And so now they're kind of sitting in the same range as each other. I'm going to do that for the last shot. Bring this down, and then do the same thing where I'm kind of pushing this. There we go. That feels like it matches pretty well. And now we can play this one back and see how it feels. I like being able to see her face in this shot better. And then this one I'm kind of imagining like could be some sort of title or something. So yeah, now if you're curious, this is kind of where we've ended up with the commercial look. And if we go back to our gallery, this is where we ended up with our filmic look. So this is our commercial look, and this is our filmic look. So we've really ended up in a very different position with the commercial look versus the film look. And we've pushed the commercial look, we've leaned into the highlights, and we've pushed the film look down and really leaned into the shadows. And you can just see with these two images side by side, you can just feel the different emotion in them. And if I showed you these two images side by side and asked you what you thought these two were from, you would likely say that the left is from a commercial and the right is from a film. And for the commercial look, you're really, your eye goes straight to the eyes of the model and you connect with that person. And with the film, you kind of look at the image and you look around and it's a little bit more mysterious and it sells a mood and an emotion. So there we have it. We have a film grade and a commercial grade, and you can see that we ended up in two very different places with the different purposes of the genres. And I hope in addition to the technique and kind of the look building aspect of this, you can see that we had completely different thought processes. And that's kind of the intention of being a colorist, is to think through and be intentional about what we're trying to sell, what emotion we're trying to create, what mood we're trying to give, and how we can use that to enhance the story or the purpose of the video. Me personally, I grade most of my projects are commercials. I definitely want to make a video about this later, but I'm asking myself two main questions the entire way through the process of a color grade. And the first question is, am I making an improvement? And the second question is, am I doing this in the simplest and most efficient way possible? Now, there's a lot of ways to unpack those two questions, but those are kind of my guiding principles as a colorist. I don't want to overcomplicate a workflow and kind of screw myself in the end when I need to make changes or I need to apply it across a bunch of clips. I want it to be as simple as possible. That's why I use different workflows for different projects. The question, am I making an improvement, means, am I making the image better? Am I telling the story better? Are the things I'm doing helping the footage, or are they hurting the footage? Are they making it more distracting? Or are they making it harder to see or harder to understand the purpose of the project? I hope you found this video helpful. It was really fun to create these two different looks on the same footage. I think it's kind of amazing how far you can push it, especially when you're working with log or raw footage. It's really fun to be able to push it around and get completely different looks. I sell LUTs and presets on my store, lutcompany.com. I have conversion LUTs there. I have creative looks. I also have a Super 8 emulation that's really fun to use for DaVinci Resolve. And follow me on Instagram, Twitter, leave a comment if you have a question, and I will see you in the next one.